Hello everybody, JGC Anime here, and today we are going to be reviewing Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. Right off the bat, I gotta say, this is probably one of my favorite isekais to ever come out. I don't care how pervy the main character is, the show itself is so well written, and I generally find myself really enjoying it. So if you guys expect some kind of like mixed review, don't expect it, because I'm going to talk about how good this show is. And if I had to say anything bad, it'd be the very rare minimum. In fact, it's probably not going to be any existent. In fact, like, I can only think of one thing I hated. But anyway, let's hop right into it. So, what is the story summary? Well, the story summary is quite simple. It's about a guy who got run over by a car and was reincarnated in another world. Sounds generic, I know, but hear me out. Okay, so things I'd have to say I disliked and liked. So, first the likes. So, the story, the characters, the world, everything. The Japanese voice acting. I really don't care for the dub voice acting. I think the kid voices in that sound terrible. But for the most part, I think both are actually pretty good. Well, at least most of the dub. The dub is fine, but I watched it subbed. Thought the sub voice acting was great. And overall, I thought the characters, the world, the setting, the story, everything was so brilliantly placed together and made so that way, even though the character was like a pervy character, there was still so much interesting storytelling. Like every single episode was jam-packed. Even the episodes I didn't like as much were still so entertaining. And there's so much I like about this show. The only thing I dislike is maybe the last story arc of the season where some characters are in a certain situation and they drag it on for the last 3 episodes before the season ends, which it was fine, but it could have been better. But for the most part, I thought this whole series was brilliant. I plan to do it. I like it so much that I want to do this by season. So, of course, they already announced season 2 is coming out, which I will 100% watch. And yeah, I can't really go into stuff that isn't spoilery. So yeah, here's a timestamp to when the spoiler section ends, because I'm about to go into spoilers because I just want to talk so much about so much of the good stuff of this show. So yeah, let's go down 5 and begin the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so now that we're in the spoiler section, I can talk full throttle about this. I love the main character Rudius's whole development as a character. While I definitely think he's an annoying perv in a lot of locations, overall he's actually still a really, really interesting protagonist. And I find his whole outtake on the world really interesting, especially with the fact that it's not just one voice or the other. It's very similar to how to summon a demon lord or overlord, where there's this inner monologuing voice that has a say in everything, while at the same time there's a kid voice in there as well. And it just adds so much more of an identity to the character, as we know exactly that he was reincarnated, but he wasn't fully reincarnated to the point where he just thought everything in the way of the character. You don't hear the kid's voice thinking, you hear the previous guy's voice thinking. I found that to be really enjoyable, and overall I definitely found Rudius as a character, he obtained a lot of growth this season by the bare minimum, and it was just so awesome. And also every character in this show is pretty good too. Even though there were some characters I didn't care about as much, for one, I really didn't care that much about Iris. I still love how her grandfather went Iris in the one scene, and I'm not sure which episode it is. I think it's episode 4 or 5, but it's so funny and I love it. All in all, I definitely, for one, love the animation. The animation in this series is brilliant. I love a lot of the fight scenes, and the wolf lady, whose name I can't remember at this point right now, has the weirdest character, at least in my opinion. While other characters were either scum or they were really nice people, she was the one I couldn't really place my finger on as to how I could understand her character. Especially when she literally just shows her rear to Rudius when he asked, just so she could stall for time, and it was so weird. But other than her character, which really weirded things out, I thought most of the characters were really well written, and overall I just found myself to really enjoy the whole story. I found every moment really exhilarating, and even the parts I didn't like as much, the last 3 episodes, which took place in an outlandish place, which I really thought they were travel to another world when I saw the teaser, but they didn't. They just kind of we're in another part of the world. I still thought it was interesting. It wasn't as interesting as my concept of them being in another world, where he was reincarnated into another world and then brought to another world, but that didn't happen. But I still thought it was interesting, especially with the fact like this was what was supposed to be demon and was turned out it was just misunderstood, and it was really interesting. And even though I really didn't like Eris at first, in fact I really hated her, and I loved it when Rudy was just like straight to her face, even though she ended up punching him to the ground after that. I still thought, yeah, dude, you do that. She was a baby about that, and I hate that. She grew on me over time. She's still annoying to me in a little way, but she's fine. And also a lot of other characters like Sylphie. I really like Sylphie as a character. I think she has or should I say he, quote unquote, even though it's a she and they think it's a he for a bit of the season, which I was kind of surprised with since she looked a lot like a female and was clearly a female. I thought her character was nice. She was a very kind, innocent person, and I respect her for that as that character. And Rudius's father was Paul was a really messed up person in a lot of ways, especially when he ended up impregnating both his wife and his maid, which was really weird. And Rudius's mom was a really good person. The maid was, I couldn't really put a finger on her, but I guess she's kind of a nice person, but at the same time, she was definitely weirder than most. But she wasn't as weird as the wolf lady, but it's really hard to pinpoint because I'm just thinking about how much I like the show. So trying to cover all of this is a lot harder than I thought it would be without talking too fast or not thinking fast enough. So I'm just gonna calm down, take a deep breath, and think it through a bit more. Okay. So if I had to say some other things I definitely liked about the show other than its story and characters was definitely how beautiful its animation was. Not just at the action scenes, but like there's this one scene in the grass where Rudius and Sylphie are just lying on the grass and it's just beautifully waving around, and it just looks so nice. And the animation is just so nice, and I really like the studio that even if it was formed just for this anime, they did a fantastic job. And honestly, there's so many positives outweigh the negatives in this show. It's impossible to give it any bad scores because it's so good. And it's weird because I'm normally used to the generic isekai genre. I really don't see them as anything more than the same thing. I've watched so many isekais in my life, it's insane. But still, even though there were so many generic isekai tropes, the way they handled them in this show was so well, just made me love them all over again. I just love the isekai tropes in this one, despite the fact that most shows and stuff I call them cliche. Like right now, I'm reading this series called Skeleton Knight Another World. I think it's getting an anime adaptation, I don't know, but I've been reading the series. And I'm currently just started book 2. Book 1 was extremely generic, playing into a field that I can't really say without spoiling it for anyone who might want to read that book. But it's this really generic formula that a few animes have indeed followed about freeing things and stuff like that. And in those types of things, I get bored easily with how generic they play out. However, with the Mushoku Tensei storyline, with a lot of the stuff they handled, such as the characters seemingly having some kind of overpowered ability, even though it wasn't in the end, they played it off really well and did a really good job. I definitely found myself enjoying this series a lot, and even though I was a little hesitant at first to check it out due to the fact of like how the series is kind of like a mixed, really good show but really bad show type thing, I wasn't really sure how to approach it. But all in all, I found myself heavily enjoying the show, and I really like the fact of how they handled the intro, where it wasn't even just like a cut to the OP. It was just the OP was playing during the scenes, playing as a part of the story instead of as an actual opening. And then there's just like this really beautiful, well animated, really nice ED that I just can't get enough of. And I just love all the songs in Mushoku Tensei are so good. And I've even actually gone and started reading the books just so I can see the difference between the two. For one, there's like the scene in the anime where like Rudius calls up a lie on his father to make sure the maid could stay even though she's impregnated and stuff like that. And in the anime, they just kind of move past it after that. But in the book, it says how Rudius goes back to the room later and tells his mom the truth, and then she just says, "I know," but it's just kind of like that, which I really like, seeing the differences between the two. And all in all, I still found myself really enjoying this series. It's hard to say anything bad about it because there was so much good, and the story was so fluent too. In other book series, I can kind of easily tell, like, okay, this happens here, this happens here, this happens here. But with this show, I couldn't tell until like the final arc when things cut. Like everything was so fluent, it was impossible for me to tell exactly when each book ended. Like until I went back and looked at the book version, I had no idea that it ended just in the book just before Rudius went to go see Eris. I thought that was just part of the original story, but no, apparently it was its own book, and which really amazed me. All in all, the story is very well done, and I think the anime is a very entertaining thing, and I definitely think I'll sit down and watch season 2 when it comes out. So we're at the conclusion of this video, and as I've said throughout the entire spoiler section, I think this show is amazing. There's almost nothing wrong with this show, and overall, it gave me the same kind of feeling I did when I watched it. Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon, or is it wrong to pick up girls in a dungeon? Depends how you want to pronounce it. But it's really a show I thought I'd dislike, but surprisingly by the end, I found myself really enjoying. And I definitely would recommend it to people who haven't given it a try yet, because it's actually a pretty good show. In the end, I'd probably have to rate this anime a 10 out of 10. It is so good. I can't say I dislike it in any way. The things that I do dislike are so like minimal in comparison that I thought the anime was so good. The CGI didn't even hurt that much because there was like 1 or 2 CGI scenes I couldn't really look at without clearly seeing the CG, but the animation in that scene as well, because there was like this really nice dancing scene in it, was so beautiful that I couldn't like really pay attention to the background because I was so focused on the dancing, and it was just so good. All in all, this season of Mushoku Tensei was really good. And when season 2 comes out, I'm 100% sitting down and watching it. And yeah, that's all I can really say about this, and I thank you all for listening. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more reviews, and I'll be taking my leave now. So yeah, thank you all for listening, and I shall see you all around. Peace.